Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that affects so many people but is honestly really misunderstood. We're talking about gestational diabetes. We're going to uncover the real story behind the diagnosis, what it actually means for you and your baby, and get into the empowering science that can put you right back in the driver's seat. So, let's get into it.
So, if you've ever been pregnant or know someone who has, you've definitely heard about the test. You know the one I'm talking about, where you have to drink that super sweet, kind of syrupy drink and then just wait. It's become a rite of passage. But what is it actually testing for?
Well, that test has a name. It's the Oral Glucose Tolerance Test, or OGT. And really, it's designed to do one simple thing: to see how your body handles a big hit of sugar. They check your glucose levels before the drink, and then they track that spike to see how well your body brings those levels back down to normal.
But here is the big question, right? What is this test really showing us? Is it just flagging some random thing that happens in pregnancy, or is it opening a window into something much deeper about your health? Well, the answer is pretty fascinating.
And that brings us to our first major revelation. It turns out a gestational diabetes diagnosis might not be so random after all. In fact, the latest science is telling a completely different story.
You see, the old way of thinking was that gestational diabetes was just, bad luck. It was something that just popped up out of nowhere during pregnancy. But what we're learning now is that for a lot of people, it's actually an underlying issue with processing glucose that was already there, maybe just flying under the radar. Pregnancy, with its natural hormonal shifts, just turns up the volume on that pre-existing issue.
And get this, a really interesting study with 700 women completely backs this up. By looking at glucose spikes way back in the first trimester, researchers could predict with incredible accuracy who would end up with a gestational diabetes diagnosis weeks or even months later. That tells you the signs aren't just appearing out of the blue, they're often there from the very beginning.
So, if glucose levels can be an issue that early on, you have to wonder, what does that really mean for the baby? Well, that brings us to a huge myth we need to bust about the placenta.
We all have this image of the placenta as this magical gatekeeper, right? This perfect filter that only lets the good stuff through to the baby and keeps all the bad stuff out. But when it comes to blood sugar, is that really how it works?
Not quite. Actually, a striking study out of Norway gives us this incredibly clear picture of the connection between a mother's blood and her baby's. It's way more direct than most of us think.
I mean, just look at how direct this connection is. Researchers measured the glucose levels of 179 moms right before they gave birth, and then they immediately tested the glucose in their baby's umbilical cord blood. The result? It was a nearly perfect one-to-one match. The higher the mom's glucose, the higher the baby's glucose. There's no real filter here. It's a direct pipeline.
So, the bottom line is this, and it's a really powerful idea. Your blood composition literally becomes your baby's. Whatever's in your bloodstream is also in your baby's.
Okay, but why does this matter so much? What actually happens when a baby is on the receiving end of these big glucose spikes? Well, this is where the conversation shifts from just being about pregnancy to being about lifelong health.
Think about it. When your baby gets a big rush of glucose, their own little body has to deal with it. Their pancreas, which is only about the size of an almond at this point, so tiny, it has to kick into overdrive, pumping out its own insulin to try and manage all that sugar. That's a ton of stress on a tiny organ that's still developing.
So you can see this chain reaction pretty clearly. Mom has a glucose spike. The baby gets that exact same spike. The baby's little pancreas works overtime, releasing a bunch of insulin. And when this happens over and over, it essentially starts to program the baby's metabolism, potentially setting them up for health risks later in life.
And the numbers here are, well, they're pretty sobering. A child whose mother had gestational diabetes has double the risk of childhood obesity. And even more startling, they have a 4 times higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes themselves. This isn't just about learned habits. It's a biological blueprint being drawn in the womb.
Now, I know that all sounds pretty heavy, but please stick with me because this next part is the most important part of our whole conversation. This is the empowering news. You have so much more control than you think, and the solution really starts with your food.
First things first, this is totally manageable. And more than that, it is absolutely not your fault. For decades, we have been sold this idea that things like granola, fruit juices, and big smoothies are the epitome of healthy eating, when in reality, they can send our glucose on an absolute roller coaster. It's confusing for everyone.
So the best place to start is breakfast.
Just look at these simple swaps. Instead of starting your day with something sugary like cereal or jam on toast, which kicks off that glucose roller coaster, try switching to something savory, something packed with protein and healthy fats, like an omelet or some avocado on toast. That's going to keep your blood sugar steady, which means your baby's blood sugar stays steady too.
And there are other really cool simple hacks you can use all day, like having some veggies before your meal, or putting clothing on your carbs, which just means pairing them with protein or fat to slow down the sugar absorption. Choosing savory snacks over sweet ones, and even just a short walk after you eat can make a massive difference in flattening those glucose curves.
Okay, so let's wrap all of this up and talk about a totally new way to look at gestational diabetes.
Here's the most important takeaway from all of this. Getting a gestational diabetes diagnosis is not a failure. It's not something you did wrong. It is powerful information. Think of it as an early warning system that gives you this incredible opportunity to protect not just your own health, but the future health of your child for their entire life. It's really a call to action.
And that really leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? Knowing just how direct this link is between a mother's food choices and her baby's metabolic future, how can we start to rethink nutrition for all pregnancies, not just the ones that get a diagnosis? It's definitely some powerful food for thought. Thanks so much for joining me.